Okay, so today we're going to talk about Chanukah. And look, I know what you're thinking. Candles, maybe some donuts, but trust me, the real story is so much bigger. It's this epic battle for identity, a real underdog story for the ages. And it all kicks off with this one massive question.
No, really. Just think about that for a second. What if the most popular, most powerful culture on the entire planet told you that everything you believed in, everything that makes you, you, was just wrong? That's the heart of the Hanukkah story. So let's get into it.
So to really get the stakes here, we have to travel back in time. We're in the 4th century BCE, and there is one culture that is basically the coolest kid in the entire world, Hellenism. This was the culture of the Greeks, and thanks to Alexander the Great, it was spreading everywhere. And Hellenism wasn't just about conquering lands, it was about conquering minds. You can think of it like a global trend that literally everyone wanted to be a part of. It was new, it was sophisticated, and it was absolutely everywhere you looked. And you can totally see why it was so appealing, right? I mean, the Greeks gave the world this mind-blowing philosophy, art that still makes your jaw drop, and, oh yeah, the Olympic Games. They were all about logic, reason, and celebrating the perfection of the human body. This was a culture that seriously seemed to have it all figured out.
But living smack dab in the middle of this huge Hellenistic empire was this small nation with a completely, and I mean radically different way of seeing the world, the Jews. And, well, this set the stage for one of history's greatest showdowns of ideas.
This quote right here, it absolutely nails the central conflict. For the Greeks, ultimate value was in the external world. A perfectly sculpted statue, a perfectly built athlete. That was holy. But for the Jews, it was the other way around. Beauty came from the inside, from holiness, from your spiritual connection to something bigger. So let's break this down. The Greek worldview. It was all about celebrating the physical body, the power of human reason, and this idea of fate, that your destiny was already written and you couldn't really change it. The Jewish worldview, though, was focused on the inner soul, on a higher purpose through divine commandment, and on free will, this wild idea that your choices actually matter and you shape your own destiny. So for a while, these two worlds kind of lived alongside each other. But that cultural pressure, that little nudge to conform, well, it was about to go from an invitation to a violent, brutal demand. A new king rises to power in the Greek Empire, a guy named Antiochus IV. And he wasn't happy just influencing the Jews. No. He decided he was going to completely erase their identity and force every single one of them to become Greek. And his laws were a direct attack on the very soul of Judaism. He banned their most sacred practices, studying their holy book, the Torah, observing the Sabbath, their day of rest, and circumcision. And then he did the unthinkable. He marched into the holiest place in Judaism, the temple in Jerusalem, and put a pagan idol right in the middle of it.
This wasn't just a culture clash anymore. Things got violent, fast. The persecution was unspeakably cruel. This was now literally a fight for their spiritual survival. So faced with the very real threat of being wiped out, a small group of Jews decided to do the impossible. They decided to fight back against the most powerful empire in the world. It was a move that looked absolutely, completely hopeless.
And this is where we meet our heroes, the Maccabees. Now, these guys weren't soldiers, they weren't generals, they were a family of priests from a tiny town. But when Greek officers came and demanded they bow down and sacrifice to an idol, their leader, a man named Antiochus, said no. And that one single act of defiance lit a fuse that sparked a full-on revolt. Led by Mattathias' son, Judah, who had the incredible nickname, the Hammer, this tiny band of rebels took on the massive professional Greek army. And against all odds, using clever guerrilla tactics, they actually won. They kicked the Greeks out of Jerusalem and took back their holy temple.
Now, what makes this victory so important, so monumental in world history, isn't just that they won. It's why they were fighting in the first place.
You see, most wars back then were about conquering land or gaining power or, stealing a bunch of gold. But the Maccabean revolt, it was completely different. In fact, a lot of historians consider this to be the world's very first religious war.
They weren't fighting to build an empire of their own. They were fighting for the right to just be themselves, for the freedom to worship their God, to read their texts, and to live by their own values. It was a battle for their soul.
So after this incredible victory, the Maccabees go into the temple to clean it all up and rededicate it. But they hit a snag. To light the menorah, this huge 7-branched candelabra, they needed a special kind of ritually pure olive oil. They searched the entire desecrated temple, and all they could find was one single, tiny flask of oil that the Greeks hadn't ruined.
Now, that one little flask had only enough oil to last for 1 day. But, with an act of faith, they lit the menorah anyway. And then, something amazing happened. The oil burned for 1 day, and then a second day, and then a third, all the way to 8 full days, which was exactly how long they needed to prepare new, pure oil.
In this event, the miracle of the oil became the central symbol of Hanukkah. It wasn't some big, flashy miracle like the splitting of the sea. It was what Jewish tradition calls a hidden miracle, just a quiet sign of hope, a sign that even in the deepest darkness, a little light can go a very long way.
So, yeah, it's an incredible story. But what does a war that happened over 2,000 years ago have to do with any of us today? Well, as it turns out, a lot.
When you strip it all away, the real message is this. Chanukah is the ultimate story about having the guts to be different. It's about standing up for what you believe in, even when the entire world is screaming at you to just be like everyone else.
So the question Chanukah kind of leaves us with is a really personal one. In a world that is always pushing you to conform, what are the parts of your identity, the things that make you, you, that are so important you'd be willing to fight for them?